Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. This is Hemalata from Ponvidyashram. Today's session is from history book Our Past 1 in the Earliest Cities. Children, we had already studied about the past, how the earliest people they lived, how they dressed, etc., and how they become farmers from hunting gathering to how they started to growing their food. So all these things we had already studied, and I also explained you about how the people started to settle near rivers, why they settled near rivers, all the things we had already learned in our previous chapters. You already know that the people first started to settle near the rivers, and especially the civilizations formed in the Indus, the river Indus, isn't it? And today's session is especially about the civilization which was formed near the Indus. There are lots of earliest cities that formed near the river Indus, but in this chapter we will especially study about the Harappan civilization. Nearly 150 years ago, when railway lines were being laid down for the first time in Punjab, engineers stumbled upon the site of Harappa, which is in Pakistan present day. To them, it seemed like a mound that was a rich source of ready-made high-quality bricks. So they carried of thousands of bricks from the walls of the old buildings of the city to build railway lines. Many buildings were completely destroyed by putting these railway lines. Later, some 80 years ago, archaeologists found the site and realized that these sites was one of the oldest cities in the subcontinent, as this was the first city to be discovered. All other sites where similar buildings and other things were found were described as Harappan. So these cities developed about 4,700 years ago. Children, you already know how the archaeologists will do the survey and how they will find out the history about a particular place. So the archaeologists had done lot of researches in these sites, and they had found out lot of things with the help of the remainings which the Indus people left. What was very special about these cities? So many of these cities were divided into two or more parts, like Citadel, Middle Town, and Lower Town. But Harappa was divided into two parts, Citadel and Lower Town. What is Citadel? Citadel is a place where people go for safety or to defend themselves or to protect themselves, where walls will be raised around that place. So usually the part to the west was smaller, but it's in higher latitude. So archaeologist describes this as the citadel. Generally, the part to the east was larger but lower. This is called the lower town. Very often, walls of baked brick were built around each part. The bricks were so well made that they have lasted for thousands of years. The bricks were laid in an interlocking pattern, and that made the walls very strong. Here, the lower town was a large settlement part of this Harappan civilization, whereas the citadel, as I said, it was on the upper town. The lower town was meant for general people and had craft workers, traders who are associated with them. On the other hand, citadel was meant for public purpose, was a small for small raised people. In some cities, special buildings were constructed on the citadel. For example, we will take Mohenjo-daro and the Great Bath. In Mohenjo-daro, there is a very special tank which archaeologists called the Great Bath, which was built on the upper town, that is in the citadel. So this was lined with bricks, coated with plaster, and made watertight with a layer of natural tar. There were steps leading down to it from two sides, while there were rooms on all sides. Water was probably brought in from a well and drained out after use. Perhaps important people took a dip in this tank on special occasions. The Great Bath of Mohenjo-daro is called the public water tank of the ancient world. So, the two wide staircases, one from the north and one from the south, served as the entry to the structure. A 1 meter wide and 40 centimeters high mound is present at the ends of these stairs. A hole was also found at one end of the bath, as I said, for the water. So, which might have been used to drain the water into it, and after the use, the water will be drained out. So, the floor of the tank was watertight due to finely fitted bricks. They had fitted the bricks in a fine way and in an interlocking way, and mud laid on edge with a kind of plaster, and the side walls were constructed in a similar manner. To make the tank even more watertight, a thick layer of bitumen, which is waterproof tar, the natural tar, was laid along the sides of the bath and presumably also on the floor. So this shows how the people had a great skill to build all these kind of things during the early period. There are some other cities were also found out, and there are some special uniqueness for all these cities. Like Kalibangan and Lothal, there fire altars were found by the archaeologists where sacrifices may have been performed by them, and some cities like Mohenjo-daro, Harappa and Lothal had elaborate storehouses where they will store food for them. Houses, drains and streets. Generally, houses were either one or two stories high, with rooms built around a courtyard. Most houses had a separate bathing area and some had wells to supply water. Many of these cities had covered drains. How carefully these were laid out in straight lines. So if you see the Harappan and the cities, they were well planned, and all the houses were two-story buildings, and the streets were in a straight line and the drains were covered. They had planned the city in a well manner and the drains were covered. This shows how they were planned to build these kind of towns. So although you cannot see that each drain had a gentle slope so that water could flow through it. So very often drains in houses were connected to those on the streets, and smaller drains led to bigger ones. So as the drains were covered, inspection holes were provided at intervals to clean them. As the drains were covered, we cannot see the wastages which are running through it, and the drains were built in a slope place, gentle slope, so that the water could not block anywhere and can flow easily. And there are small drains, inspection holes were also built in intervals so that if any blockage happens, they can clean it easily. So, all three houses, drains, and streets were probably planned and built at the same time. The streets were at straight lines, isn't it? The drains were on the sides of the streets. The houses were built in a perfect two stories with bricks, and each houses had separate bathrooms, and some houses had wells too. So this shows that how the early people and how they developed their knowledge about building these architectures. Now we will see how the life of the city was, how the people lived in the Harappa. A Harappan city was a very busy place. There were people who planned the construction of special buildings in the cities. These were probably the rulers. It is likely that the rulers sent people to distant lands to get metal, precious stones, and other things that they wanted. So they may have kept the most valuable objects such as ornaments of gold and silver or beautiful beads for themselves. And there were scribes, people who knew how to write, who helped prepare the seals and perhaps wrote on other materials that have not survived. Seals were made by them for the use of trade, which we will study later in this chapter. So, besides, there were men and women craftspersons making all kinds of things. So, either in their own homes or in special workshops. The people were traveling to distant lands or returning with raw materials and perhaps stories. So, many terracotta toys have been found, and a long time ago, children must have played with these. The people of Harappa had their own knowledge, and they had traveled to distant places for trade and also to develop their knowledge. So already we saw that how the cities were well planned and constructed, and also we saw some special buildings like Great Bath also built on the citadel. This shows how the people of Harappa lived in a great way. The people also traveled for trade purpose, as I said. They brought gold, silver, which were used for ornaments, and also precious stones from distant lands, so which we will see later in this chapter. So they had made lot of seals. So they used seals to describe their different kind of trades which have been done by them. If you see this picture on the top, that is a street in Mohenjo-daro with a drain, and there is a well. So a Harappan seal, this is a Harappan seal, and the signs on the top of the seal are part of a script. This is the earliest form of writing known in the subcontinent. Scholars have tried to read these signs, but we still do not know exactly what they mean. And this image, these are the terracotta toys. Terracotta toys are made up of clay, and later on it will be sun dried. So these toys were used by the children of the early stages of Indus Valley civilization. So in the later session we will study about the new crafts which were there in the Indus Valley civilization, and how the raw materials were brought by the people and how they had done the trade with other civilized peoples and what kind of food they used, etc. in our later chapter. Now we will recollect some points that we had studied in this session. The civilization which was formed near the Indus River is called as Indus Valley Civilization. So among the cities which were formed in the civilization, there are special cities like Harappa, Mohenjo-daro. They have unique architecture which were built by the people. So these cities must be formed, developed some 4700 years ago. So when we take cities, the cities were divided into two or more parts: citadel, middle town and lower town. Harappa is divided into two parts: citadel and lower town. Citadel is a higher place and lower town is at a lower place. Then we had saw some important thing architectures which were built by the people, like great bath, which is a bath used for religious purpose. Then other cities like Kalibangan, Lothal were also found, where fire altars, so the sacrifices must have been performed there, and also storehouses were also found in these cities. Then the houses were two-storied and the drains, they were well planned, and the streets were also well planned and constructed. So inspection holes were there. Each house had separate bathrooms and drains and wells. So all these were well planned and constructed by the Harappan people. And then the lifestyle of the Harappan people, they were craft persons, they were traders,